The sun was sliding down the western sky when Thomas Hale reined in his horse at the edge of a dry arroyo. All afternoon he had followed the faint trail of a stray calf, but now he was staring at something that did not belong in the barren wash, a motionless shape half hidden among the mesquite and tumbleweed. At first he thought it was another carcass like so many the drought had claimed. Then the shape stirred, a thin hand clutching at the cracked earth. He swung out of the saddle, boots crunching on gravel. The shape resolved into a woman, skin darkened by sun and dust, hair matted, lips cracked and bleeding. An Apache. Even before he saw the blue-black tattoo on her wrist, he knew. His gut tightened with a familiar blend of anger and fear. 3 years ago, a raiding party had taken his wife and newborn son. He had never learned their fate. He had sworn then never to show mercy to the people who had stolen everything from him. But now at his feet lay a single human being who looked barely alive. Her dress was torn. A long cut crusted with dried blood ran from her shoulder to her ribs. She was so light, so still that he could almost pretend she was not breathing. Then her eyelids fluttered open, and a pair of dark eyes fixed on him. Not defiant, not pleading, simply empty, as if life itself were slipping away, and she had no strength to hold it. Thomas hesitated. His hand brushed the butt of his revolver. He could ride on, leave her to die in the dust. Nobody would know. Nobody would blame him. But even as the thought formed, he noticed the smallness of her frame, the way her fingers twitched toward his canteen as though instinct guided them. She was not a raider now. She was a dying woman. He crouched beside her. "Can you hear me?" he asked gruffly. No answer, only a rasp of breath. He unstrapped his canteen, uncorked it, and tilted it to her lips. She swallowed once, coughed, swallowed again. Water ran down her chin and soaked into the dust. Her eyes fluttered closed, but he thought he saw a flicker of something, hope or recognition, before they did. He looked up at the empty horizon. The nearest settlement was 20 miles away. His cabin stood 5 miles north across rocky ground. He could take her there. He could also leave her, finish searching for the calf, and be home by dark. His chest ached as he remembered another pair of eyes, his wife's, wide with terror the night she was taken. He had not been there to save her. He was here now. "Damn it," he muttered and slid his arms beneath the woman's body. She weighed almost nothing, bones and rags and fever heat. She moaned once, a sound like wind through dry grass. He lifted her into the saddle, mounted behind, and nudged the horse into a careful trot. Each jolt made her head loll against his chest. He could smell smoke in her hair and something else, fear maybe or shame. As they rode, he kept telling himself he was only doing what any decent man would do. Yet the truth burned under the words. He did not know if he could forgive her kind, but he could not watch another life slip away when it was in his power to save it. For now, that was enough. The sun dropped lower, staining the horizon crimson. Ahead lay his cabin, a single square of light against the darkening hills. In his arms the woman stirred faintly, whispering words he could not understand. He tightened his hold and pressed his heels to the horse's flanks. Whatever tomorrow brought, answers, guilt, danger, it would begin tonight with a choice he had already made. By the time Thomas reached his cabin, the last sliver of sun had disappeared. A thin line of smoke rose from his chimney. He had left a banked fire before riding out, but the world around him felt cold. He dismounted carefully, lowering the Apache woman into his arms once more. She gave a low groan but did not open her eyes. Her body was hot against his, the fever stronger now. He pushed open the door with his shoulder. Inside the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old coffee. Everything was as he had left it. A single bed pushed against the wall, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a faded photograph of his wife and infant son propped above the hearth. The photograph's edges were curled, its image ghost-like in the flickering light. He tried not to look at it as he carried the woman to the bed. Her weight sank into the mattress as though it might swallow her. Thomas hesitated, then fetched a basin of water from the barrel outside, poured it into a tin bowl, and began to clean the wound at her shoulder. The gash was angry, rimmed with dust, the kind of wound that killed more by fever than by blood loss. He worked slowly, jaw tight, trying to keep his thoughts blank. But the memories came anyway. 3 years ago, before the raids, his wife Mary had sewn a small quilt to cover the baby's cradle. He remembered her bent over the fabric, humming softly. He remembered the night of fire and shouting, how the cabin door had burst inward, how he had returned from the pasture to find it all gone. Mary, the baby, and the quilt too. He never saw them again. The men he tracked after that wore the same kinds of tattoos as the one on this woman's wrist. He rinsed the cloth in the bowl and dabbed her wound again. She stirred and opened her eyes a crack. For a heartbeat he thought she might speak, but she only stared at the ceiling, lips moving soundlessly. He wondered what she saw, his face. Another man's? Some memory she could not escape. Thomas sat back on the stool and rubbed a hand over his jaw.
"Why are you here?"
He muttered, not expecting an answer. "Why on my land?" The fire popped. The woman shifted again, whispering a word he did not know. Then with surprising strength her hand groped for his wrist. He froze. Her fingers were thin but warm, trembling. Her eyes opened wider, locking onto his. In halting English, rough with accent, she whispered, "You remember me?" Thomas's stomach clenched. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Did he remember her? He had seen so many faces in smoke and chaos, and yet there was something familiar in the tilt of her cheekbones, the scar above her brow. I was there," she murmured. "I did." "Bad thing." Her eyes slid closed again, her grip loosening. "I run from them. They hunt me now." Thomas stared at her hand on his wrist, feeling the tremor of her pulse. It was as if the past had taken flesh and lain down in his bed, asking him to decide what to do. He pulled his hand back slowly, stood, and turned to the fire. Outside, coyotes yipped at the rising moon. Inside, Thomas poured himself a tin cup of water and tried to steady his breathing. He had wanted answers for years, and now some of them were lying, fevered only a few feet away. He did not know if he could forgive, but he did know that if she died before he heard the whole story, he would never find peace. He glanced back at her, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tomorrow you'll tell me everything." The wind pressed against the cabin walls. Somewhere inside him old hatred stirred, but so did something else, an ember of curiosity or pity, or perhaps the first faint spark of understanding. He banked the fire higher, sat down at the table, and kept watch over her until the night stretched into silence. Morning crept into the cabin on a thin blade of light, slicing across the floorboards and climbing to the bed where the Apache woman lay. Thomas had not slept. He had sat most of the night at the table, arms folded, eyes fixed on her breathing. Each time she shifted or murmured, his hand went unconsciously to the revolver on his hip. He told himself it was caution, but as the sky lightened, he realized it was also fear. Fear of hearing the truth she carried. He rose stiffly and poured water into a tin cup. Her eyelids fluttered. The fever had broken a little. A damp sheen covered her forehead. He helped her sit, propping a pillow behind her. She drank slowly, each swallow seeming to cost her effort. When she finished, she kept her gaze lowered as though ashamed to look at him. "You're awake enough to talk," Thomas said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Who are you? Why were you out there?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then she drew a ragged breath and raised her eyes. "My name is Nietzsche," she whispered. "I was with a band a long time ago. We came here." He felt his jaw tighten. "I remember," he said. "You burned homes. You took—" His voice caught. He slammed the tin cup onto the table. "You took everything." Her hands clutched at the quilt. "Yes," she said softly. "I was there. But I did not know the man who led us would kill women. I did not know." She trailed off, shuddering. "When the soldiers came after us, I ran. I ran from them, from my people. I have been running ever since." Thomas stared at her, struggling to match the hollow-eyed woman in his bed with the shadowed figure from his nightmares. "Why are you telling me this?" he demanded. "Why now?" Nietzsche's lips trembled. She lowered her gaze again, voice nearly breaking. "Because I am dying," she said. "And because I have no one left. I thought if I came here, maybe you would finish it. Maybe you would give me the punishment I deserve." He took a step back, startled. "Punishment?" She nodded, then looked up at him with a flash of desperation. "But if you forgive me—" Her words caught. She pressed a hand to her mouth, gathered herself. "If you forgive me, I can give you a child." The cabin went silent. Outside, a hawk cried somewhere over the hills. Thomas felt as if the floor had shifted under him. "What are you saying?" he asked slowly. "I have nothing else," Nietzsche said. "No family, no tribe, no name worth keeping. Only my life." She touched her stomach lightly, almost shyly. I can give you new life, a child, a son or daughter to carry your name, not as payment, but as a way to make right what I did wrong. Thomas's mind spun. The memory of Mary's empty cradle, the nights he had stared at the photograph until his eyes burned. All of it came rushing back. A child. It was what had been stolen from him, the echo of his greatest loss. And here was the woman who had been part of it, offering to fill that void. He took another step back, rubbing a hand over his face. You think a child would erase the past? He said. You think it would make me forget? Nietzsche shook her head. No, it will not erase. It will not make you forget. But it will be something new. Something born from forgiveness, not hate. Thomas stared at her, breathing hard. He saw not a raider now, but a gaunt, trembling woman, her eyes pleading not for mercy alone, but for a chance at redemption. And he felt, for the first time in years, a crack in the stone that had sealed his heart. He turned away, staring out the small window at the pale hills. I don't know if I can, he said quietly. I don't know if forgiveness is in me. Behind him, Nietzsche's voice came so soft it was almost lost in the wind. Then kill me. Or forgive me. But do not let me go on like this. Thomas closed his eyes. The choice she had set before him was as stark as the desert outside. Death or forgiveness. Hate or something else he could not yet name. For a long time after Nietzsche's whispered ultimatum, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The morning light grew stronger, filling the small space with a harsh brilliance that left nowhere for shadows to hide. Thomas stood by the window, fists resting on the sill, staring out at the pale sweep of hills. Behind him, she lay motionless on the bed, her face turned toward the wall. Only the faint tremor of her breathing showed she was alive. He had thought himself prepared for anything, a confession, even a plea for death. But her offer had cracked open something inside him. In the years since Mary and the baby were taken, Thomas had built a life of routines as rigid as fence posts. Rise before dawn, ride the perimeter, work until dark, sleep, repeat. It was how he had kept the grief from devouring him. Now this woman, once part of the nightmare, was lying in his bed offering him the very thing he had lost, a child, a chance at continuity. It felt like a cruel trick of the desert. He turned from the window and crossed the room, every movement heavy. Why did you come here? He asked, his voice low. Of all the places to run, why mine? Nietzsche did not move. Because, she whispered, I knew you would remember, and because I knew you would not look away. Her lips curved in a bitter half-smile. Your eyes were full of hate that day. A man who can hate that deeply can also forgive if he chooses. Thomas's hands tightened at his sides. You're sure of that? No, she said. But I hoped. He crouched beside the bed, looking at her properly for the first time. Without the fever's flush, she seemed younger, almost fragile. The lines around her eyes etched more by suffering than age. You think forgiveness is just a choice, he said, shaking his head. It's not. It's a wound that never closed. Some days it feels like the only thing keeping me upright. Her gaze flicked to the photograph above the hearth. That is your family, she murmured. The woman and the small one? He hesitated, then nodded. I am sorry, she said simply. I cannot give them back. The word struck him harder than any confession. He looked down, swallowing against the knot in his throat. No, he said. You can't. For a moment neither spoke. Outside wind rattled the shutters. Thomas straightened and began pacing the small room, boots scuffing the floorboards. His mind replayed the raids, the smell of smoke, the shouting, the charred remains. He had always pictured the raiders as faceless demons. Now he had to imagine them as people, one of whom lay sick and trembling in his bed. He paused at the table and poured a splash of whiskey into a tin cup, but his hand shook so badly he set it down untasted. He wanted to hate her, to drive her out into the dust and be done with it. But he also remembered the way her fingers had reached for his canteen, the way she had clutched his wrist in the night like a drowning person reaching for a rope. Hate and pity warred inside him until he no longer knew which was which. Finally, he sat down opposite her, elbows on his knees. I can't promise anything, he said. Not forgiveness, not a future, not even a place here. Nietzsche turned her head slightly, eyes glinting in the slanting light. I do not ask for promise, she said. Only that you decide. He looked at her a long moment. In her face he saw not a raider but a mirror, of his own loneliness, his own hunger for some kind of absolution. He rubbed his temples. "I need time," he muttered. "Time to think." She nodded once and closed her eyes, as if even that small answer were a kind of reprieve. Thomas rose and went to the door. The air outside smelled of sage and sun-baked earth. He filled his lungs, but the weight in his chest did not ease. He knew he was standing on a knife edge between two futures, one where he cast her out and returned to his solitude, and one where he tried, truly tried, to build something new from the wreckage of the past. Behind him, the cabin creaked as the wind shifted. He kept his eyes on the horizon, feeling the tremor of choice ripple through him. Somewhere inside, hate still coiled like a rattlesnake. But over it, faint and insistent, another feeling had begun to stir. Not yet forgiveness, but the possibility of it. That evening, the wind died down and the world outside the cabin grew unnaturally still. Thomas cooked a thin stew from beans and the last of his jerky. Setting 2 bowls on the table, Nietzsche managed to sit up on her own now, though she moved like someone learning the limits of a new body. Her wound, freshly dressed, no longer bled, but her face remained pale and drawn. When he handed her the bowl, she cupped it carefully in both hands, inhaling the steam before tasting. They ate in silence at first. The crackle of the fire and the occasional pop of a log were the only sounds. Thomas had told himself all day that he would ask her questions, demand the truth. But each time he opened his mouth, he found his throat tightening. She seemed equally hesitant, as though she feared any word might tip the fragile truce between them. Finally, she broke the silence. "Your land is quiet," she said softly. "No neighbors close?" "Not for miles," Thomas answered. "That's the way I like it." She nodded, staring into her bowl. "In my childhood, our camps were never still. Always moving. Always people laughing, singing, then raids, soldiers, hunger," she hesitated. "I used to dream of a place with no sound at all. Now I find it, and it feels heavier than I imagined." Her words struck something in him. "This place wasn't meant to be quiet," he said after a moment. "Mary, my wife, she used to sing while she cooked." The baby would kick his heels on the floor and squeal. When they were gone, I stopped hearing anything but wind. He stared into the fire. "Some nights I thought the silence would crush me." Nietzsche lowered her spoon. "I am sorry," she murmured. "I never saw your wife. Only smoke and orders and fear." She paused. "I did not think about the people inside the houses until it was too late." Thomas looked at her across the table. The way she spoke, without self-pity but also without excuses, disarmed him more than tears could have. "Why did you run from your people?" he asked quietly. She drew a slow breath. "After that night, I saw what we had become. The man who led us took children, burned homes. We were told it was war, but I felt shame. When soldiers came, I let them scatter us. I ran. I thought if I went far enough, my shame would fall off like dust. But shame walks faster than any horse." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Thomas realized he had been holding his breath. "You've been alone since then?" She nodded. "A few traders gave me scraps. Some settlers threw stones. When winter came, I thought I would die." She gave a bitter smile. "I almost did until you found me." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I almost left you there," he admitted. "I told myself it wasn't my problem." "But you didn't," she said simply. He stared at her, surprised by how much that mattered to him. "No," he said. "I didn't." The firelight flickered across her face, softening the hollows of her cheeks. For the first time since she had entered his life, he felt the edge of his anger dulling. She was no longer just a figure from his nightmares, but a person who had lived through her own. She set her bowl aside and wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Do you still hate me?" she asked. Thomas hesitated. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've hated a long time. I'm not sure who anymore. You, your people, myself. Maybe all of it." Nietzsche's eyes glistened.
"Hate is heavy," she whispered.
"It makes the hands tired. That is why I offered a child, not to buy your forgiveness, but because I wanted to put something lighter in your hands." He looked at her across the dim room, feeling a strange stirring in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the silence between them no longer felt crushing. It felt like a space where something new could grow. Outside, the first stars blinked into the darkening sky. Inside, Thomas poured 2 small cups of water and raised his in an awkward gesture. "To lighter hands," he said. Nietzsche gave a faint smile and touched her cup to his. "To lighter hands," she echoed. For the first time in years, Thomas heard the faintest echo of warmth in his own voice. 2 mornings later, A brittle frost coated the mesquite and the water barrel outside the cabin had a thin skin of ice. Thomas rose before dawn, moving quietly so as not to wake Nietzsche. She slept curled under the blanket, her breathing deeper now, the fever all but gone. Each day she had regained a little more strength. She had even begun helping him grind coffee beans and wash dishes, but her presence still unsettled him. They were like two people walking across a frozen lake, unsure how thick the ice was. He stepped out into the cold air, rubbing his hands, when the sound of hooves drifted from the north. At first he thought it was only one rider, maybe a neighbor he rarely saw. But as the sound grew louder, he counted at least 3, maybe 4 horses. His gut tightened. Few people came this far off the trail, and when they did, they usually wanted something. He went back inside, shutting the door softly. Nietzsche was sitting up, already alert. "Riders," he said. Coming fast, her face drained of color. "Soldiers?" she whispered. "Could be settlers," he said. "Could be worse." He crossed to the rifle above the hearth and checked the chamber. He had no wish for a fight, but neither would he be caught unprepared. Nietzsche clutched the blanket to her chest. "If they see me here, they might take you," Thomas finished. "Or shoot you on sight." He hesitated. "You can still slip out the back. There's a stand of cottonwoods by the creek bed. You might make it." She looked at him, eyes wide. "You would let me go?" He didn't answer right away. He could send her out, wash his hands of her, tell himself it was mercy. But some part of him recoiled at the thought of her stumbling, half-healed through the desert, hunted again. "Stay here," he said at last. "Let me handle them." Nietzsche drew a sharp breath. "If they know you are hiding me, they will call you traitor." "Maybe," he said. "But I'm not handing you over." She stared at him a long moment. Something flickered in her expression, surprise, then something softer. She slid off the bed and ducked into the narrow pantry space at the back of the cabin. "I will be silent," she whispered. Thomas closed the door to the pantry, then straightened as heavy knocks rattled the front door. He opened it a crack. 3 men sat on horseback in the yard, dust on their coats, rifles slung across their saddles. The one in front wore a star-shaped badge. "Morning," the man said. "Name's Turner. Sheriff out of Barlow Crossing. We're looking for a runaway Apache woman. Dangerous. We heard she might have been seen heading this way." Thomas kept his face impassive. "Haven't seen anyone but coyotes," he said. "What's she accused of?" "Raiding parties," Turner said. "Murder, theft. Word is she's half dead, but a wounded snake still bites. If you see her, you send word." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll do that." Turner's eyes slid past him toward the interior. "You out here alone?" "Always am." The sheriff studied him a beat longer, then tugged his reins. "Keep your rifle handy." The 3 men wheeled their horses and rode off, dust pluming behind them. Thomas shut the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. He waited until the hoofbeats faded before crossing to the pantry. Nietzsche emerged, trembling. "They will come back," she said. "Maybe," he admitted. "But not today." She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "You chose to protect me," she said quietly. "Even before you forgave me." Thomas set the rifle down. "I don't know if forgiveness has happened yet," he said. "All I know is I wasn't going to let them drag you away like an animal." Her eyes glistened. "Then perhaps forgiveness has already begun." He gave a short, rough laugh. "Maybe." Outside, the frost was melting in the sun. Inside, the air between them felt different, not safe yet, but less brittle. They had both risked something, and in that risk, a sliver of trust had taken root. For 2 days after the sheriff's visit, a taut quiet settled over the cabin. Thomas kept one eye on the horizon, expecting a return of riders, but none came. He still did his chores, splitting wood, hauling water. But the rhythm felt changed, as if the world outside had tilted. Inside, Nietzsche moved more freely. She helped wash dishes, mended a tear in his only decent shirt, and ventured outside to gather herbs from the edge of the creek. Yet an invisible line still divided them. She on one side of the hearth, he on the other, their words careful, their eyes seldom meeting for long. On the 3rd evening, the sky turned copper. Clouds streaked like brushstrokes over the hills. Thomas finished stacking kindling and stood for a long time on the porch, watching the light fade. He thought about the choice he had already made, protecting her from the sheriff, and how it had felt less like a decision than a reflex. He wondered what that meant about the man he had become. When he went back inside, Nietzsche was sitting at the table, grinding the herbs she had gathered. The smell was sharp, clean. She looked up at him. "This will help your sleep," she said softly. "It calms the heart." Thomas hung his hat on its peg. "Maybe I need it," he said. "It's been a long time since my heart was calm." She hesitated, then pushed the bowl aside. "You have questions still," she said. "About that night." He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Nietzsche folded her hands. "I cannot undo what I did," she began. "I cannot bring back the people we harmed. But I want you to know—" Her voice broke. She steadied it. "I tried to stop them when they took the women. I failed. I have carried that failure every day." Thomas felt a weight shift in his chest. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "Because I think you need to hear it," she said. "Because the ghosts between us will not leave until the truth is spoken." He sat opposite her, elbows on the table. "You're right," he said quietly. "I needed to hear it. All these years I've imagined you all as one blur. I didn't want to think you were human." She met his gaze. "And now?" He let out a slow breath. "Now I see a person sitting across from me. Someone who's lost as much as I have." The fire popped. Outside, coyotes called to one another across the hills. Nietzsche's eyes glistened. "Do you still hate me?" she whispered. Thomas looked at her a long time. He thought of Mary's laugh, the baby's tiny fingers curling around his own. He thought of the years of bitterness, the nights alone with the photograph, and then he thought of the woman before him, shivering in his arms at the edge of death, whispering her plea for forgiveness. "I don't know if hate is the right word anymore," he said. "I've carried it so long it's just been part of me. But when I looked out that door and told the sheriff I hadn't seen you—" He shook his head. "In that moment, something shifted. I wasn't lying to protect an enemy. I was protecting someone under my roof." Nietzsche's lips trembled. "Then maybe you have forgiven me." Thomas reached across the table, his hand hovering above hers before finally settling on it. Her skin was warm, trembling. "Maybe I have," he said. "Or maybe this is what it looks like when forgiveness starts." For a heartbeat, she stared at their joined hands as if unsure it was real. Then she bowed her head, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Thomas squeezed her fingers, feeling his own eyes sting. It wasn't absolution, not yet. But it was a bridge across the canyon between them. When she lifted her head again, there was a tentative smile on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "We can't change the past," he said. "But maybe we can build something different from here." Outside, the copper sky deepened into violet. Inside, for the first time in years, Thomas felt the cabin fill with a kind of quiet that didn't crush him. It felt like the hush before dawn, a silence not of emptiness but of possibility. The days shortened as autumn deepened. Frost glistened on the grass each morning, but the cabin no longer felt like a tomb. Thomas woke to the smell of herbs Nietzsche brewed for tea, to the faint scrape of her sweeping the hearth with a willow broom she had fashioned from creekside branches. He still rose early to ride the fence line, but now when he returned there was someone waiting, someone who looked up from her work and met his eyes without flinching. The change had been gradual, like water wearing away stone, but undeniable. They still spoke little of the past. Some memories were too heavy to lift every day. Instead they spoke of small things, how to mend a saddle, where the wild onions grew, which clouds meant rain. At night, when the fire burned low, Thomas would catch himself listening for Mary's humming and realize instead he was hearing Nietzsche murmuring a lullaby from her own childhood. The sound no longer jarred him. It filled the cabin with something soft, something living. One crisp afternoon, Nietzsche ventured beyond the creek for the first time, gathering dried grasses for weaving. Thomas followed at a distance, watching her stoop to pick seed heads, her long braids swinging like a pendulum. When she noticed him, she smiled shyly, as if to say she understood his caution but welcomed it. They walked back together without speaking, the hills golden around them. That evening, over a simple supper, she set down her spoon. "I want to tell you something," she said quietly, "about the child I offered." Thomas looked up, heart tightening. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted gently. "When I lay dying by the creek, I thought only of what you had lost. I thought if I offered you a child, you might spare me. But now," she folded her hands, "now I want you to know it was not a bargain. It was a hope. A child can mean many things. It can be flesh, yes, but it can also be the beginning of a new way, a life not ruled by hate." Thomas's throat worked. "And which did you mean?" She met his gaze steadily.
Both, she said, if we choose it.
But even if no child is born from us, we have already begun something new. She gestured at the small cabin, the mended shirt on the peg, the herbs drying by the window. This is a different life than either of us had before. For a moment, Thomas could not speak. He saw Mary's photograph above the hearth and for the first time felt no stabbing pain, only a quiet ache and gratitude. He reached across the table and covered Nietzsche's hands with his own. "You're right," he said. "We have begun." She smiled faintly, eyes bright. "Then let us keep beginning." The next morning he saddled 2 horses instead of 1. Together they rode to a nearby ridge, where the land rolled out beneath them in endless ripples of grass and mesquite. The air was clear and cold. Nietzsche closed her eyes and breathed deeply, face turned to the sun. Thomas watched her and realized that, though he could never replace what he had lost, he could choose what to carry forward. Forgiveness was not an event but a practice, like mending fences, done a little at a time, day after day. When they turned the horses back toward home, Nietzsche reached out and touched his arm lightly. "The child I spoke of," she said, almost shy. "Perhaps it is also us, 2 lives making 1 new life. Perhaps that is enough." Thomas felt the corners of his mouth lift in a small, surprised smile. "Perhaps it is," he said. Below them, the cabin waited, smoke curling from its chimney into the high blue sky. It was still a lonely outpost on a hard land, but it no longer felt like the edge of the world. It felt like a place where something could grow, and as they rode down the slope side by side, Thomas understood that whatever the future held, a real child, or simply the slow work of living without hatred, their story had already turned from an ending into a beginning.